we're going to have a little question and answer period if anybody has any questions. And we invite you all to visit the National Archives in San Francisco, for millions and millions of more stories are there, and some of those stories may be your stories. So thank you. And once again, a big thank you to our actors, Diane, Val, Chris Guerin, and Bob Barton. Thank you again, Angel Island. Immigration Station Foundation. Questions?
What percentage was let in and what percentage were sent back?
Well, that's an interesting question. After what they spent... Okay, the question is, what percentage are adjudged to have been excluded after this fanatical interrogation process? And anybody can correct me if I'm wrong. This is just what I read. After spending the equivalent of what today would be billions of dollars trying to exclude various Chinese laborers and et cetera, and doing all this extensive policing and interrogation, only, I've heard, the best estimate is something like 10% were actually excluded during that period. If anybody has a better figure. Sure.
So Dan's right in that the percentage of people excluded was very small. But what's really important is the number of people who who decided not to come because they feared being put through a process like this. That was the big deterrent. So not only were people excluded, but people were frightened off from coming by this because everybody in China knew that they would go through this process that folks here went through today.
And people were very concerned about that, and they often tried to really prepare very well. But there was a major decision in 1905. Previous to that, many Chinese immigrants had fought these exclusions out in the federal courts in San Francisco with great success, and thousands of people were admitted, and all the racists in town were ready to hang the federal judges. But at 1905, it's a Supreme Court decision in Toy, which was also tried right here in San Francisco initially and then appealed to the Supreme Court, decided that every immigration process had to go through the Immigration Service without appeal to the courts for judicial review, unless there was some flagrant violation of the law. And so after that, it really chilled out the amount of Chinese immigration, and the next year only 105 people even applied to enter through San Francisco in the U.S.
Were these ever considered unconstitutional?
Was the Chinese Exclusion Act ever considered as unconstitutional? Not to my knowledge. I guess the Supreme Court. There are several decisions, and quite a few actually, that we have in our archival records from the 1880s and 1870s, in which the Circuit Court and then the Supreme Court struck down certain sort of racist provisions in San Francisco laws and in detention proceedings as unconstitutional. But after the passage of the Toy decision, that didn't happen, and it actually lasted until 1443, when it was finally repealed on, I think it was May 7th. And that was during the war, and they needed the Chinese people as allies. So it's partially politics, but... Sure, yes, your question.
How do you think the reenactment of what happened here compares to the news today?
I think probably the real thing. Her question was, how did this reenactment compare? And first of all, as I was saying at the outset, this was an incredibly short series of interrogations. These things went on for days and days and days. And the very most lengthy one that we know of, which was Kwok Shi's case, which Bob Bard has written about extensively, she was detained, what was it, Bob, 20 months?
Yep.
Yeah. And it was so bad, and her lawyers never had an opportunity to review who accusers were and what the accusers said. They were kept totally in the dark. And the only reason she was set free was that the Circuit Court of Appeals in San Francisco caught them on that and decided under the 14th Amendment that Kwok Shi hadn't been accorded due process under the Constitution. And that's how she got free. She might still be here today otherwise.
Were most lawyers Chinese or Caucasian?
I believe that most of them were Caucasian, and they had some pretty power law firms on their side. McGowan and Worley was one of those. I think Bob can say a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I'd like to go back to the previous question, which was, how do these proceedings here compare with the kinds of immigration proceedings that go on today? And the answer really is that they're very similar. And one of the big tragedies, and the most difficult part for people who were detained here, was that you didn't know how long you were going to be here. You might be here a couple of days, you might be here a couple of months, you might be here a year and a half, like Kwok Shi was. You didn't know. And that weighed on you. That was very, very hard to bear. And today, we have about 30,000 people in detention in immigration facilities who face very much the same sort of situation. We're detained, we don't know for how long, we don't know what it will take to get us out of detention.
And they make them wear pink underwear.
Pastor, the guy there 4 months and
Yeah.
the Baron up here.
We have a person right here who's detained for 4 months. So congratulations getting 3 of those people. So yeah, the real interrogations, you could be called back multiple times and detained there for a long period. Some people were like in first-class passengers on the steamships, sailed right through. Other ones just face incredible difficulties and interrogations of which this is maybe like 1,000th of the stress that they faced that we saw today. Yes. Well, I don't know. You know, we have some great historians here today, Judy Young and Erica Lee, who are selling their books in the mess hall, and also Bob Barty's up there. They might be able to answer those questions, because there's been a lot of research done, particularly over the last 25 or 30 years on this. And so, you know, people today are much more willing to come forward and explain what happened to them under these really laws which were sort of counter to the American ideals. They were total, you know, polarity and opposition to what American values are and should be. And one of the great stories of this whole episode, and has been repeated many times, is that very often it was the minorities in our country who fought and gained all the humans, and not all, but quite a few, but probably most of them, the civil and human rights that benefited all the rest of us today. And for that, we really want to thank them for that. That was a great achievement. So that's how it goes. Sometimes the American dream is only kind of a violated vision, and then people come along and